What is up, you guys, and welcome to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name's Mackenzie and I'm a stained glass artist. I'm an artist in many areas, but my main gig is stained glass. And if you're returning, thank you for coming back. So I was looking through my YouTube videos and I had noticed I don't have any videos specifically about soldering, which is a pretty important step in the stained glass process. So I figured in today's video we're going to make a very simple Moonphase, and I'm mainly going to be concentrating on soldering and how to do that. So if that sounds interesting, let's go. Okay guys, so obviously the very first step in this, we're going to have to cut out the stained glass, then we're going to have to grind it and wrap it before we can get to soldering. So if you want more detailed information about any of those other steps, I do have specific videos for those already on my channel. I'll link them down below or put them in a card somewhere on this video. So for now, I'm just gonna speed through all these steps before we can get to the actual soldering. Okay, so I figured since you guys are gonna be watching this anyway, I'm just gonna touch on a few points as we're going through this. So obviously, I'm just going around tracing out all my stencils. These are handmade stencils, but again, it's super easy Moonphase, so they're just basically circles and half circles. But what I did want to quickly talk about is how I group everything together. So obviously, I'm making a few Moonphases here, so I'm going around and tracing all of my light blue pieces, then going into the dark blue, then I'm going to do the pink. That way, when I move on to my next step, I have all my pieces at the same area or at the same level. So I'm going to trace all my Moonphases, so say it's 10 pieces, tracing them all, then I'm gonna go grind all 10 pieces. That way I'm not going through all these motions, taking out all the tools I need, cleaning up and remaking a mess 10 times versus one doing them all together. I hope that makes sense. So yeah, again, just quickly going through, cutting out all these pieces. The next thing we're going to be doing is quickly grinding them. Okay, so as you can see here, I've moved on to grinding. The most important thing to remember is safety glasses, because glass will be flying everywhere. Again, if you want a better description or more in-depth tutorial, I will have that video linked down below in my description box. Okay guys, as you can see here, I've got all three of my pieces ground. I quickly washed them, so now all that's left to do before we can solder is wrapping them in copper foil. So I'm wrapping every single piece in the copper foil that would basically show the least through. So what I mean by that is, right now I'm using the regular copper foil because this pink opaque color is not going to let any background color show through. So when I move on to the light blue one, I will use a silver base because I'm going to be using a silver soldering chain. So really quick, I just want to go over my soldering iron setup here. So here's my iron. I use a Hallie FX601. I find Halle's the best. You get what you pay for. And I always have it sitting in this little stand. I've got my wet sponge right underneath it because you always need to clean off your tip. And I've got some tip tinner. So if it starts to wear away, I can quickly retin it as I'm working. And we can go over all those kind of details in another video specifically on irons. Okay guys, so I've already cut my stained glass, ground it, wrapped it in copper foil. Now we're getting to soldering. So what I'm doing right here is pre-cutting rolls of solder. So this is what a roll of solder looks like. And for stained glass, it is definitely recommended amongst the masses to use a 60-40, which is lead tin based solder. So there is lead in this solder, which means one, you want to use a mask. That's more so for the flux, which we'll get into in a second, because for lead to really affect you as far as heating it and burning it, it would need to be heated until almost like evaporation, which would never happen with a soldering gun, but whatever, you should still be wearing a mask for the flux. So what I'm doing is just taking this roll of solder and I'm pre-cutting little rods, because it's a lot easier to handle a small rod of solder like this than to hold your 1 pound roll the entire time you're trying to solder. So I've got a whole bunch of rods cut right here. In this little jar, I've got flux. So this is one of the most important vital pieces of soldering. So this is what it looks like. It comes in a little plastic bottle, just like patina does. As always, I like to use the brand Novacan. I don't know why, but I just like them all around for everything. If they make something, I'm gonna try to find it in their brand. So this is flux. And basically, what flux does is helps the solder stick to your copper foil, as well as make it flow smoother. Let's set up our little Moonphase here so I can kind of explain it as I'm doing it. All right, so here's my Moonphase. Like I said, I've already wrapped all the edges in copper foil, and again, there are other specific videos on each individual step on my channel, and I'll link them all below or make a playlist. So all the edges are wrapped in copper foil, and without this, we would never be able to solder anything, because solder is not just going to stick to anything. It would not stick to glass. So to get the solder to stick to something, you need copper foil. So metal to metal, that's what it's gonna adhere to. But if we didn't lay any of this liquid flux onto the copper foil, the solder is gonna have a very, very difficult time sticking. So let me just zoom you in. I've already turned on my iron. I've wet my sponge. So if I just took really quick some solder and tried to lay it on this copper foil, you can see it that just looks like crap. So you can see not only did it not flow super smooth, why is this not focusing? Okay, so it didn't flow super smooth and it didn't stick to just the copper foil, so it just made a mess. And what flux does, all you need is a little bit of that flux. So I'm laying down some of that liquid with a plastic handle brush, and that totally changes how that solder burns. So now you can see that the solder wants to melt. It wants to just, it almost lays itself down once you have the flux where you need it to be. And now you have a perfect, smooth, soldered edge. So without flux, you're not gonna get very far. Don't even bother. So again, what I'm gonna do here is take a plastic handled brush. So with flux, it's an acid-based product. You don't wanna use a full metal brush because it's going to get all corroded and nasty looking, like the tip of this brush right here. So you wanna have a plastic handled brush. I put my flux in a little jar just to make it easier. Is just lightly coat all of my copper foil edges. And depending on what you're using, like I said, I use a 60-40 lead tin based solder, is what's gonna dictate how hot you want it. So I run mine right at about maybe 340, which is a little hot. Sometimes I'll keep it at like 310, maybe 320. So I've got my solder ready. I'm gonna wipe off that solder that was sitting on there for a while and just give it a fresh coat before I start laying it down. And that's basically it. If you're not doing a huge piece and all you're needing to cover is small edges like this, you can just pick up solder as you go. So every single piece that I'm working on, I'm just gonna pick up a little bead, melt it onto my tip, and then transfer it onto my copper foil edge. So I got my copper foiled edge. It's covered in a little bit of that liquid flux. There's liquid flux and paste flux. I like liquid so much better. I just find it's a lot less messy and easier to work with. So again, I'm just picking up little beads as I need them and very quickly running them over the edge of the copper foil. If you keep your soldering iron on your piece of glass for a long time, you're gonna end up risking cracking your glass piece. Okay, so now that I've done both sides, I'm gonna have to do the edges. Again, where my nails come in handy. So what I'm gonna do is kind of set up, let's see, get a bigger piece. I'm gonna set up my solder rod so it's sticking up off the mat, and it's basically hands-free. I can just go in and pick up a bead when I need it. So I'm holding my glass. Obviously you're gonna need gloves if you don't have nails like mine to protect your fingers from the hot solder. And same thing I did with the edges. I'm just picking up a bead of solder when I need them and rolling it along that edge. So just like I've said before, everything comes with practice, and I do think absolutely everybody solders and makes stained glass so differently. So it's just a matter of finding what works for you or what works best for you. Because I know people in the community that definitely solder or cut glass very differently than I do, but neither of them are wrong ways. It's just everybody has a way that works best for them. So again, I'm picking up beads and just lightly and quickly running over those soldered edges to make sure every single section is covered in solder. You can't leave any of that copper foil exposed. Okay guys, so everything's soldered. Now we've got to put these pieces together. So what I have here are things called jump loops. And basically what they are just little metal hoops that you can open up and use to connect chains or like jewelry stuff. These are so tiny, I'm never gonna be able to show these to you. Those are jump loops, and you can open them. There's a little split on one side. So these are what I use alongside either black or silver chain, depending on if I'm gonna make the piece black, metal, or silver. This one specifically is going to be black, so I can patina those after and patina the metal around the Moonphase. So I've already cut all my little chain pieces. So the first thing I'm going to do is put jump loops on every single end and one to connect the hanging chain from. Okay, so I've got all my chains and jump loops together. And basically all we have to do now is connect all our Moonphase pieces. So I'm gonna start with the top piece. because this is going to be a vertical moon phase. One of the smallest pieces is going to be on the top. So first chain to connect is going to be our hanging chain. And I'm basically just placing that jump loop right in the center of this moon. And I'm placing the split of the jump loop. So this little metal hoop, like I said, has an opening. I put the chain on, closed it, but where that opening is, I'm gonna put right up against the moon phase. That way I can encase it in solder and there's no more opening. So I put the hanging chain there. Next, I'm going to have a single strand. Again, placing that split jump loop opening up against the moon. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the next moon on the strand. Now I'm going to dip my brush into that flux, place some flux over that jump loop, again because this jump loop would not stick, or the solder would not stick to the jump loop whatsoever without that flux. So laying that flux down, then I'm going to pick up my soldering iron, clean off that old solder, replace some metal on the tip, and I'm going to put a giant bead down. What you hear burning is the flux, and that is what you do not want to breathe in. So I'm just completely encasing that jump loop into the, or completely encasing it with solder. Sorry, I'm stuttering non-stop today. So again, going to the bottom and laying a generous amount of solder to encase that jump loop and attach it to the moon. Okay, so now that we've got all of our pieces together, we're gonna have to solder the back side. So just to make extra sure that we fully encase these jump loops, we wanna solder the back side so it looks finished just like the front. So I'm going to flip all of these pieces over. Hit that metal with a little bit of flux. It doesn't need much because it was already covered on the front side. And just drop a small bead of solder onto the back side of every one. Okay guys, that is it. This piece is finished. Now all I need to do is give it a quick wash. I'm going to patina the metal and I'll show you what it looks like. Okay guys, so here is what the finished moon phases look like. I patinaed the ones that had black chains, so the outside solder matches those. And left the dark blue one with the silver chain. So I hope you guys found today's video helpful. If you have any questions, as always, leave them down below. I'm always around to answer them. And of course, I'm going to link anything that I can, so any products I use and I can find the link for, I will link in my description box. And I'm also going to put my Instagram and my Etsy, so if you like this kind of content, go check me out over there. And if not, I will see you next time. Bye!